A billionaire overhears a black woman singing his mother's lullaby. As they delve into this coincidence, what family secret will be exposed, changing their lives forever? And if you cherish your family and love videos like this, subscribe to our channel to have 10 years of luck in your life. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows of Melody's Corner, one of Chicago's most cherished cafes in the historic district. Lucas Harrington entered the establishment, his tailored charcoal suit setting him apart from the casual crowd. Despite his commanding presence, his eyes carried a distant look, weighted by thoughts of his family empire and the constant pressure of maintaining the Harrington legacy. Lucas chose a seat near the back, maintaining his usual practice of observing before engaging. The cafe buzzed with a typical afternoon crowd, students with laptops, business people closing deals over coffee, and artists seeking inspiration. Yet Lucas remained detached from the scene, his mind drifting to the morning's board meeting where his father's absence had been particularly noticeable. The empty chair at the head of the table served as a constant reminder of his increased responsibilities and the family expectations that now rested solely on his shoulders. The ambient chatter in the cafe suddenly diminished as a gentle melody cut through the air. Lucas's attention shifted to the small stage in the corner, where a young woman had taken her place behind the microphone. Nia Rivers began her performance without introduction, her voice carrying the soft, melodic tones of an old lullaby across the room. The song, though simple, held a depth that immediately caught Lucas's attention. Her voice possessed a quality that transcended the mere technical aspects of singing. It carried emotion in its purest form, reminiscent of the way his mother used to sing to him during thunderstorms. The memory hit Lucas unexpectedly, his mother's voice, the safety of his childhood bedroom, the way she would stroke his hair until he fell asleep. These were memories he had carefully locked away after her passing, deemed too painful to revisit in his adult life. The lullaby Nia sang wasn't just any song, it was Sweet Dreams, Little Bird, a lesser-known melody that his mother had claimed was passed down through generations. Lucas found himself moving closer to the stage, drawn by both curiosity and an inexplicable sense of connection. The coincidence seemed too specific to ignore. As the last notes faded, Lucas remained rooted to his spot near the stage. Nia opened her eyes, meeting his gaze with a warmth that contrasted sharply with the cold business world he inhabited. Without planning his next move, something unusually spontaneous for a man who calculated every business decision, Lucas approached her as she stepped down from the stage. "That song," he began, his voice carrying a hint of emotion he rarely allowed others to hear. "It's not one you hear often." The statement served as both observation and question. Nia smiled, adjusting the strap of her guitar case over her shoulder. "My grandmother taught it to me," she replied, her voice carrying the same gentle quality that had captivated the audience moments before. "She always said it was a special melody, meant for special moments." Lucas introduced himself, deliberately omitting his last name and the weight it carried in Chicago's business circles. Nia's response was genuine, untainted by the recognition his family name usually sparked. They moved to a nearby table, the cafe's other patrons fading into the background as their conversation deepened. The initial exchange grew into a discussion about music, memories, and the way certain melodies could transport a person through time. Lucas found himself sharing details about his childhood that he had never voiced aloud, while Nia spoke of her own musical journey and the influence of her grandmother's stories. Neither of them know. Tice the sun setting outside the cafe windows, or the curious glances from other customers who recognized the city's most eligible bachelor engaging in what appeared to be an intimate conversation with an unknown singer. In that moment, they were simply two people discovering an unexpected connection, unaware that their chance meeting would unravel a complex web of family histories and long-buried secrets. The evening crowd at Melody's Corner had thinned, creating an intimate atmosphere as Lucas and Nia settled into their conversation. The coffee shop's warm lighting cast a gentle glow over their table, where empty cups and half-eaten pastries testified to the hours they'd spent talking. Their initial connection over the lullaby had opened a door to deeper discussions about their families and the past. Lucas wrapped his hands around his third cup of coffee, his usual formal demeanor softening as he shared memories of his grandmother, Elizabeth Harrington. She was different from what people expected of a Harrington matriarch, he explained, his voice carrying a hint of admiration. While everyone saw the society woman who hosted Chicago's most prestigious events, I knew her as the grandmother who would sneak me into the kitchen for midnight ice cream and tell me stories about her youth. Nia leaned forward, her eyes brightening with recognition. It's funny you mention that. My grandmother, Rose Rivers, was a force of nature too. She worked as a jazz singer in the 1960s, but there was always something mysterious about her past. She'd get this distant look whenever she talked about her early days in Chicago. Nia paused, considering her next words carefully. She kept a box of old photographs and letters in her attic, but she never let anyone look through them. When I asked about them once, she just said some memories are better left in the past. The mention of hidden memories sparked Lucas's interest. In his family, secrets were currency, carefully guarded and traded only when necessary. Did your grandmother ever mention any connections to the old North Shore society families? He asked, thinking of the exclusive circles his grandmother had moved in. Nia's expression shifted, a mix of surprise and curiosity crossing her face. Actually, yes. She used to tell me about performing at private parties in Lake Forest and Winnetka. She'd mention these elaborate gatherings, but whenever I pressed for details, she'd change the subject. She took a sip of her tea, now gone cold. There was one story she'd hint at after a few glasses of wine, something about a friendship that ended badly, but she never gave me names. Lucas felt his pulse quicken slightly. His grandmother had also alluded to a lost friendship that had caused significant pain. The timing couldn't be coincidental. My grandmother kept a locked drawer in her study, he shared. After she passed, I inherited the key, but I've never opened it. Something always held me back. Their eyes met across the table, both recognizing the weight of what they were discovering. The possibility that their grandmother's lives had intersected in some significant way seemed increasingly likely. The cafe's ambient music faded into the background as they pieced together the fragments of their family histories. We should look into this, Nia suggested, her voice carrying a mix of excitement and apprehension. If our grandmothers knew each other, maybe understanding their story could help us understand our own connections better. She hesitated before adding, I still have access to my grandmother's house. All those letters and photographs are probably still there. Lucas nodded slowly, his business instincts recognizing the importance of thorough investigation. And I have the key to that drawer. Perhaps it's time to unlock both literally and figuratively what our grandmothers kept hidden. They agreed to meet the following day at Nia's grandmother's house, both feeling the pull of unraveling this mystery. As they exchanged contact information, their hands briefly touched, sending an unexpected current of electricity between them. The simple task of planning their investigation had somehow taken on a more significant meaning. As they prepared to leave the cafe, Lucas found himself looking at Nia with new eyes. She wasn't just the singer whose voice had caught his attention hours ago. She was potentially the key to understanding a part of his family's history that had always been shrouded in mystery. Similarly, Nia saw beyond Lucas's billionaire facade to someone who shared her desire to understand the complex tapestry of their family histories. The cafe staff began stacking chairs on tables, signaling closing time. As they stepped out into the Chicago night, both felt the weight of what they'd discovered and the anticipation of what lay ahead. Their grandmother's past seemed determined to bring them together, though neither could predict the profound implications this investigation would have on their lives. The musty air of Nia's grandmother's basement greeted them the next morning. Sunlight filtered through small ground-level windows, illuminating decades of accumulated memories stored in cardboard boxes and old trunks. Lucas observed the space with careful attention, noting how different it was from his family's meticulously organized storage facilities. Nia navigated through the maze of boxes with familiar ease, pointing to a corner where several weathered containers sat beneath an old quilt. My grandmother always kept her important things here, she explained, pulling away the fabric covering. Dust particles danced in a beam of light as she lifted the lid of the first box. The contents revealed themselves gradually. Bundles of letters tied with faded ribbon, photographs in ancient albums, and various mementos from a life well lived. Lucas knelt beside her, his usual pristine suit collecting dust as they began their investigation. The first photograph they examined showed two young women in elegant 1960s attire, standing arm in arm in front of a Grand Lakeshore Drive mansion. "That's my grandmother Rose," Nia said, pointing to the woman on the left with a striking resemblance to herself. Lucas's breath caught as he recognized the other woman, a younger version of his grandmother Elizabeth, her smile more carefree than he'd ever seen in family portraits. As they sorted through the materials, the story began to unfold through yellowed pages and handwritten notes. The letters revealed a deep friendship between Rose and Elizabeth, filled with shared secrets and dreams. They wrote about music, society events, and their hopes for the future. The early letters sparkled with youth and optimism, but as they progressed chronologically, a darker undertone emerged. Lucas found a particularly telling letter dated summer 1965. His grandmother's usually elegant handwriting appeared rushed and emotional. "My dearest Rose, I cannot believe what they're saying about you and James. Surely you wouldn't betray our friendship this way. Please tell me it isn't true. I need to hear it from you directly." Nia's hands trembled slightly as she read the letter. "James," she repeated softly. "My grandmother never mentioned anyone by that name." She reached for another bundle of letters, these tied with black ribbon instead of the cheerful colors of the earlier correspondence. The subsequent letters revealed increasing tension between the two women. Accusations flew back and forth about betrayal, about choosing between loyalty and love. The final letter in the collection, written by Rose, carried a tone of both defiance and regret. "You choose to believe the worst of me, Elizabeth. Perhaps that's easier than facing the truth about your own family. What happened with James was not what you think, but I see now that our friendship cannot survive this misunderstanding. I hope someday you'll understand why I made the choices I did."
Luc,
As sat back against a dusty trunk, processing the implications. This scandal, whatever it was, completely severed their friendship. But who is James, and what really happened? The businessman in him wanted to create a timeline, to analyze the facts systematically, but the personal nature of the discovery made it difficult to maintain professional distance. Nia reached into the box again, pulling out a small diary bound in worn leather. As she opened it, a newspaper clipping fell to the floor. Lucas picked it up, his eyes widening as he read the headline. "Prominent Chicago family faces financial scandal, James Hartford implicated." The tension in the basement grew palpable as they realized the magnitude of what they discovered. This wasn't just about a friendship torn apart. It was about a scandal that had rippled through Chicago's elite social circles, affecting both their families in ways they were only beginning to understand. "We need to know more," Nia said firmly, closing the diary and holding it close. "These letters raise more questions than they answer. And I can't help but feel that understanding what happened between them is somehow important for us, here and now." Lucas nodded, his mind already formulating a plan. "We should start by researching this James Hartford person. There must be records, newspaper archives, something to help us understand his connection to both our families." As they carefully repacked the boxes, both felt the weight of their discovery. Their grandmother's past had become inexplicably intertwined with their present, creating a connection neither had anticipated when they first met in the cafe. The basement's shadows seemed to hold more secrets, waiting to be uncovered by their joint investigation. Lucas and Nia found themselves in the Chicago Public Library's archives section the following day, surrounded by microfilm readers and bound volumes of old newspapers. The main reading room's high ceilings and oak shelves created an atmosphere of academic solemnity as they began their research into the mysterious James Hartford. Lucas had arranged for special access to the library's restricted archives through his family connections, giving them entry to records not typically available to the public. The librarian, a meticulous woman named Mrs. Chen, guided them to a private research room where stacks of materials awaited their inspection. "I pulled everything we have on Chicago society from 1960 to 1970, Mrs. Chen explained, gesturing to the organized piles. The Hartford name appears in several society columns and financial reports during that period. She left them with instructions on handling the delicate materials and a warning that the archives closed at 5. As they began their investigation, a pattern emerged through the yellowed pages of Chicago's past. James Hartford appeared frequently in photographs of charity galas and business announcements, often standing near Elizabeth Harrington or Rose Rivers. The society pages painted a picture of a charismatic figure who moved easily between Chicago's elite social circles. "Look at this," Nia called out, carefully spreading a newspaper from 1965. The headline read, "Hartford Investment Group announces major expansion." The accompanying photograph showed James Hartford shaking hands with Lucas's grandfather, Richard Harrington. In the background, barely visible but unmistakable, stood Rose Rivers. Lucas leaned closer, studying the image. "The date matches the letters we found. This was just weeks before the scandal broke." He reached for another volume, this one containing financial records from the period. As he scanned the pages, his professional training helped him spot irregularities in the reported figures. Their research revealed that James Hartford had been more than just another society figure. He had served as a financial advisor to several prominent families, including both the Harringtons and the Rivers. The investment group he managed had handled significant portions of both families' wealth. A small article from a business journal caught Nia's attention. "Hartford Investment Group faces federal investigation," she read aloud. "Sources claim unauthorized trading activities and misappropriation of client funds." The article was brief but damaging, suggesting that Hartford had betrayed the trust of Chicago's elite. However, as they dug deeper, inconsistencies began to surface. Lucas found records indicating that Hartford had attempted to warn several clients about unstable investments, but his warnings went unheeded. A memo, tucked away in a folder of business correspondence, suggested he had discovered something troubling about certain financial practices common among Chicago's wealthy families. "It's like he was caught between something bigger than just financial misconduct," Nia observed, connecting pieces of the puzzle. "These dates align perfectly with when our grandmother's friendship fell apart." The tension in the research room grew as they discovered a final, crucial article dated shortly after the scandal broke. It mentioned Hartford's sudden disappearance from Chicago, with speculation about whether he had fled to avoid prosecution or had been forced to leave to protect someone else's interests. As the library's closing time approached, Lucas and Nia gathered their notes, both feeling the weight of their discoveries. The Hartford scandal clearly ran deeper than either had imagined, touching both their families in ways that remained unclear. The investigation had raised more questions than it answered, particularly about the true nature of James Hartford's relationship with their grandmothers. "We need to talk to people who were there," Lucas decided, his business instincts kicking in. "There must be someone who remembers what really happened." He was thinking of his father's old business partners, the ones who had been young executives during the Hartford era. Nia nodded, but her expression showed concern. "The more we dig, the more I worry about what we'll find. Are we ready for the truth, whatever it might be?" The question hung between them as they left the library, stepping into the Chicago evening. Their investigation had moved beyond simple curiosity about their grandmother's past. They were now uncovering secrets that could potentially affect both their families' legacies and their growing connection to each other. The following days brought Lucas and Nia face to face with the living connections to their family histories. Lucas arranged meetings with several retired executives who had worked alongside his grandfather during the Hartford era, while Nia sought out her grandmother's former colleagues from the jazz circuit. Their first breakthrough came from Walter Sullivan, a retired vice president from Harrington Industries. The meeting took place in his Lake Forest mansion, where antique furniture and old photographs created a time capsule of Chicago's golden age. Sullivan, now in his 80s, remembered James Hartford vividly. Hartford wasn't the villain everyone made him out to be, Sullivan revealed, his hands trembling slightly as he poured himself a scotch. He discovered irregularities in several family accounts, not just the Harringtons, but nearly every major family in Chicago. The problem was, he couldn't prove anything without implicating everyone involved. Lucas absorbed this information with growing unease. The implications for his family's legacy were troubling. "What kind of irregularities?" he pressed, maintaining his composure despite the mounting tension. Sullivan's response was careful, measured. "Let's just say that the wealth of Chicago's elite wasn't always acquired through entirely legitimate means." Hartford found himself in an impossible position: expose the truth and destroy dozens of families, or become the scapegoat. Meanwhile, Nia made contact with Margaret "Peggy" Williams, a former singer who had performed with her grandmother Rose. Their meeting in Peggy's modest South Side apartment revealed another layer of the story. Rose and Elizabeth were inseparable before the scandal, Peggy explained, showing Nia photographs from old performances. But it wasn't just friendship between them. They were working together, using their positions in society to help people Hartford had identified as victims of financial manipulation. The revelation stunned Nia. Her grandmother, whom she had known as a jazz singer, had been involved in something far more complex. "What happened to change things?" she asked. Peggy's expression darkened. "Someone discovered what they were doing. Threats were made. Elizabeth chose to protect her family's reputation, but Rose chose to stand by Hartford. She believed exposing the truth was more important than maintaining social status." When Lucas and Nia reunited to share their discoveries, the pieces began falling into place. The scandal that had torn their families apart wasn't a simple case of financial misconduct. It was a deliberate cover-up that had forced both their grandmothers to make impossible choices. "My grandmother chose family over truth," Lucas said quietly, the weight of this realization settling heavily on his shoulders. "She protected the Harrington name at the cost of her friendship with your grandmother." Nia reached across the table between them, taking his hand. "And my grandmother chose truth over security. They both lost something precious, but for different reasons." The impact of these revelations extended beyond their historical significance. Lucas found himself questioning his own role in maintaining the Harrington legacy. How much of his family's current wealth was built on the foundation of those covered-up misdeeds? The businessman in him understood the complexity of generational wealth, but the man he was becoming, the man who had fallen for Nia, couldn't ignore the moral implications. As they processed these discoveries, both felt the weight of their ancestors' choices pressing upon their own relationship. The past wasn't simply past, it was actively shaping their present, challenging them to decide how to move forward with the knowledge they'd gained. The revelation about their family's histories cast a shadow over Lucas and Nia's developing relationship. The Chicago social scene, which had largely ignored their connection during its early stages, began to take notice as they were spotted together more frequently at various venues across the city. During a charity gala at the Art Institute of Chicago, the underlying tensions finally surfaced. Lucas stood among board members and investors, his attention constantly drifting to Nia, who was providing the evening's entertainment. The whispers around him grew, increasingly difficult to ignore. Marcus Sterling, a longtime family friend and business associate, approached Lucas during Nia's performance. "The board members are talking, Lucas," Marcus said quietly, swirling his champagne. "They're concerned about your association with Ms. Rivers. Given your position and the Harrington name, you must understand how this looks." His tone carried the weight of generations of social expectations. "Have you considered that her sudden appearance in your life might not be entirely coincidental?" Lucas felt a familiar anger rising, the same one he'd experienced when discovering the truth about his family's past. "What exactly are you implying, Marcus?" His voice remained controlled, but his grip on his glass tightened. Marcus leaned closer, his voice dropping further. "Think about it, Lucas. A struggling singer suddenly catches the attention of one of Chicago's most eligible bachelors? The timing seems convenient, especially given the current review of the Harrington Foundation's finances." The insinuation hung in the air between them. Lucas watched Nia on stage, her voice carrying the same pure quality that had first drawn him to her at the cafe. The thought that others might view their connection as calculated felt like a personal assault on everything they discovered together. The situation deteriorated further when Nia overheard a conversation in the ladies' room later that evening. Two board members' wives discussed her relationship with Lucas in cutting terms, suggesting she was following in her grandmother's footsteps by trying to infiltrate Chicago society. The word stung, not just because of their cruelty, but because they twisted the noble truth about her grandmother's past actions into something sordid. When Lucas found Nia in a quiet corner of the gallery, her eyes reflected the hurt of these accumulated slights. "Maybe they're right," she whispered, her usual confidence shaken. "Maybe we're just repeating history, trying to bridge a gap that's too wide to cross." Lucas wanted to dismiss her doubts, but his own uncertainties had begun to surface. The weight of his family's legacy, the expectations of the board, and the newfound knowledge of his family's past created a complex web of obligations and doubts. He found himself questioning whether their connection was strong enough to withstand the pressure of generations of carefully maintained social barriers. The evening ended with an uncomfortable distance between them. As they parted ways, both felt the ghost of their grandmother's broken friendship haunting their own relationship. The truth they had uncovered about the past was becoming a test of their present, challenging them to decide whether they would let history repeat itself or find the strength to forge a different path. The following days brought more scrutiny. Business associates began questioning Lucas's judgment in board meetings, while Nia's booking requests at high-end venues mysteriously declined. The social machine that had destroyed their grandmother's friendship decades ago seemed determined to recreate its work in the present. In the wake of growing social pressure, Nia made a decision to investigate deeper into her grandmother's past independently. She spent long hours in her grandmother's house, methodically going through every drawer, cabinet, and hidden corner that might hold additional clues. Her determination led her to a false bottom in an old jewelry box, where she discovered a collection of letters she had previously missed. These letters, dated after the main scandal, revealed a completely different narrative than the one Chicago society had accepted. Written in James Hartford's distinctive hand, they detailed an elaborate plan that had been set in motion to protect both the Harrington and Rivers families. The letters explained that Hartford had discovered evidence of widespread financial manipulation throughout Chicago's elite families, but more importantly, he had uncovered a systematic pattern of exploiting smaller investors. The most shocking revelation came in a letter dated just weeks before Hartford's disappearance. He wrote to Rose, "My dearest friend, what Elizabeth doesn't understand is that by taking the blame, I'm protecting both families. The truth would destroy not just the guilty, but innocent people who depend on these institutions. Your friendship with Elizabeth must be sacrificed to protect something greater. Remember, sometimes love means letting go to protect those we care about." Nia's hands trembled as she read these words. The traitor that society had condemned had actually orchestrated his own downfall to prevent a greater catastrophe. The supposed betrayal that had torn apart her grandmother and Elizabeth's friendship was, in reality, an act of sacrifice designed to protect both families. Meanwhile, across town, Lucas grappled with his own doubts in his penthouse office. The weight of the Harrington legacy pressed heavily on his shoulders as he reviewed old company documents. His position as CEO gave him access to archives that even his father had never fully examined. Later, any night, he discovered a series of encrypted ledgers from the Hartford era. After having his tech team decrypt the files, Lucas found himself staring at evidence that confirmed Hartford's actions. The ledgers showed how Hartford had carefully restructured investments to minimize damage to smaller investors while maintaining the appearance of impropriety on his part. More surprisingly, they revealed that both Rose and Elizabeth had initially been part of his plan to reform the system from within. When Nia arrived at Lucas's office to share her discoveries, she found him surrounded by papers and digital displays, his usual polished appearance showing signs of strain. Their eyes met across the room, both recognizing that they had independently arrived at the same truth. "He sacrificed himself," Lucas said quietly, gesturing to the evidence spread across his desk. "Hartford took the fall to protect everyone involved, including our grandmothers." Nia nodded, pulling out the letters she had found. "And our grandmothers falling out. It wasn't about betrayal at all. It was about choosing different paths to protect the people they loved." The revelation created a new tension between them. The parallel to their own situation was impossible to ignore. They too faced a choice between protecting established interests and fighting for something they believed in. The pressure from Chicago society to conform to expected patterns suddenly seemed less important in light of their ancestors' sacrifices. However, Lucas hesitated to embrace these revelations fully. As CEO of Harrington Industries, he had responsibilities to shareholders, employees, and a legacy built over generations. Knowing the truth doesn't make our choices any easier, he admitted, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Nia moved closer, placing the letters on his desk alongside the ledgers. Maybe not, she agreed, but it shows us that sometimes the right choice isn't the easy one. Lucas and Nia decided to organize a family gathering at the Harrington estate to address the revelations they discovered. The mansion's formal dining room, with its crystal chandeliers and oil paintings of past Harrington patriarchs, provided a fitting backdrop for what would become a pivotal moment in both families' histories. Present were Lucas's father, Richard Harrington Jr., his Aunt Margaret, and 2 senior board members who had served since his grandfather's time. From Nia's family came her mother Grace, her uncle James, named after Hartford himself, though she'd never known the connection, and her father's sister, Patricia. The tension in the room was palpable as servers poured water and wine, the crystal glasses catching the light from above. Lucas stood at the head of the table, his posture reflecting years of corporate leadership training. "We've asked you here because we've discovered information about our family's shared history that changes everything we thought we knew," he began, his voice steady despite the gravity of the moment. As Lucas and Nia took turns presenting their evidence, the letters, the decoded ledgers, Hartford's true role in the scandal, the reactions around the table shifted from skepticism to shock to something approaching fear. Richard Harrington Jr.'s face grew increasingly pale as the truth about his father's involvement in the financial manipulations came to light. "This is absurd," Margaret interrupted, her voice sharp with denial. "You're trying to rewrite history based on a few old letters and questionable documents." She reached for her wine glass, but her hand trembled so violently that she nearly knocked it over. Nia stepped forward, placing Hartford's final letter on the table. "This isn't about rewriting history," she explained, her voice gentle but firm. "It's about understanding the true sacrifice that was made to protect both our families." The breaking point came when Richard Harrington Jr. suddenly clutched his chest, his face contorting in pain. The room erupted into chaos as Lucas rushed to his father's side. "Call an ambulance," he shouted, loosening his father's tie as color drained from the older man's face. In the tense moments that followed, as they waited for the ambulance to arrive, Richard grabbed Lucas's hand and whispered, "The safe, behind your grandfather's portrait. There's more." Then he lost consciousness. The medical emergency brought an abrupt end to the confrontation, but it had revealed something crucial. There were still secrets to be uncovered, and the strain of maintaining them was literally killing the older generation. As the paramedics wheeled Richard out, the remaining family members stood in shocked silence, the weight of decades of deception hanging heavy in the air. Grace Rivers, Nia's mother, broke the silence. "I always wondered why my mother-in-law, Rose, never talked about her time in high society. Now I understand. She was protecting us all." Her voice carried a mixture of sadness and admiration. The evening ended with more questions than answers, but one thing had become clear. The truth about their family's interconnected past could no longer remain buried. While Richard Harrington Jr. was rushed to the hospital, Lucas and Nia exchanged knowing looks. The safe behind the portrait might hold the final pieces of this generational puzzle. The medical emergency had transformed their quest for truth from a historical investigation into an urgent family matter. As family members departed the mansion that evening, the divide between the Harringtons and the Rivers seemed both more pronounced and more artificial than ever before. The fluorescent lights of Chicago Memorial Hospital cast harsh shadows as Lucas and Nia waited outside the cardiac unit. Richard Harrington Jr.'s condition had stabilized, but the doctors insisted on keeping him under observation. The sterile hospital corridor provided a stark contrast to the opulent mansion they'd left hours earlier. While Lucas coordinated with medical staff and handled urgent business matters remotely, Nia noticed subtle changes in his demeanor. The usually composed CEO allowed worry lines to crease his forehead, and his typically perfect posture showed signs of strain. The crisis had stripped away layers of social conditioning, revealing the son beneath the successor. When they were finally allowed to visit Richard's room, they found him looking fragile against the white hospital sheets, various monitors beeping steadily around him. Medical equipment surrounded his bed, a tangible reminder of mortality that seemed at odds with the Harrington image of power and control. "The safe," Richard said weakly, gesturing for Lucas to come closer. "I should have told you years ago." His voice trembled with the effort of speaking. Hartford wasn't just protecting our financial interests. He was protecting our family's deepest secret. Nia stepped forward, her presence providing silent support as Richard continued. "Your grandmother Elizabeth," he said, looking at Lucas, "and Rose Rivers were more than friends. They were half-sisters." The revelation landed like a physical blow. Lucas gripped the hospital bed rail for support as Richard explained further. Their grandfather, Lucas's great-grandfather, had maintained two families, one public and one hidden. Elizabeth and Rose had discovered their connection in their youth and had formed a bond that went far beyond friendship. Hartford had helped them maintain their secret while working to gradually transfer wealth to provide for both families equally. "The financial scandal," Richard continued, his voice growing weaker, "was orchestrated to prevent the truth from coming out during a federal investigation. Hartford took the fall to protect both families from a scandal that would have destroyed everyone involved." The heart monitor's steady beeping provided a rhythm to the heavy silence that followed. Nia's hand found Lucas's, their fing. Heirs intertwining as they absorbed the implications of this revelation. They weren't just connected by their grandmother's friendship, they shared blood. "I've spent my entire life maintaining appearances," Richard admitted, tears forming in his eyes. "The pressure of keeping these secrets, it's been killing me slowly for years." The monitor showed a slight spike in his heart rate as emotion overcame him. A nurse entered to check Richard's vitals, forcing a pause in the conversation. During this brief interruption, Lucas and Nia exchanged glances, both understanding that this revelation changed everything, not just their understanding of the past, but their perspective on their own relationship and the future they might build together. When the nurse left, Richard reached for both their hands, joining them together in his weakened grip. "Don't make the same mistakes we did," he pleaded. "The truth doesn't have to destroy us. Maybe it's time for both families to heal." The weight of generations of secrets and lies seemed to lift slightly from Richard's shoulders as he shared this burden with the younger generation. His color improved slightly, as if unburdening himself had physical as well as emotional benefits. The discovery in Richard's hospital room set in motion a series of events that would fundamentally transform both families. In the days following the revelation, Lucas and Nia worked together to open the safe behind the portrait in the Harrington mansion. Inside, they found documentation that definitively proved their shared bloodline, birth certificates, private letters, and legal documents that outlined a complex web of inheritance arrangements Hartford had helped establish. The most significant document was a letter written jointly by Elizabeth Harrington and Rose Rivers, dated just before Hartford's disappearance. The letter revealed that both sisters had agreed to the plan that would separate them publicly to protect their children's futures, knowing the society of their time wouldn't accept the truth of their relationship. Hartford, who had uncovered their connection while managing their finances, had become their trusted confidant and protector. Lucas gathered both families together once again, this time in the hospital's private conference room where Richard could participate. The atmosphere was markedly different from their previous confrontation at the mansion. Richard's brush with mortality had softened the resistance of even the most stubborn family members. "Our grandmothers weren't just friends who had a falling out," Lucas explained to the assembled relatives. "They were sisters who sacrificed their relationship to protect all of us." James Hartford didn't betray anyone. He orchestrated his own downfall to keep their secret safe and protect both families' futures. Nia continued the explanation, her voice steady as she shared the contents of the safe. The financial scandal was crafted to divert attention from a federal investigation that might have exposed the truth. Hartford took the blame for financial mismanagement to prevent deeper scrutiny into the family's affairs. The revelation of their shared bloodline initially created shockwaves through both families. However, Richard's near-death experience had created a window of opportunity for reconciliation. From his hospital bed, he made a series of decisions that would reshape both families' legacies. First, he authorized Lucas to begin the process of merging the separate trust funds Hartford had established, acknowledging both family lines as legitimate beneficiaries of the Harrington fortune. Then, he publicly announced his intention to step down from the board, passing full control to Lucas with the mandate to reform the company's practices according to the ethical principles Hartford had tried to institute decades ago. Most significantly, Richard insisted on holding a joint family gathering once he was released from the hospital. Not in the Ormel Harrington mansion, but in Rose River's old jazz club, which Nia had maintained over the years. The symbolism of this choice was lost on no one. For Lucas and Nia, the revelation of their distant cousinship initially created complications in their romantic relationship. However, as they worked together to heal their family's rifts, they realized their connection transcended conventional definitions. After careful consideration and consultation with both families, they decided that their shared blood was distant enough to pursue their relationship, which had grown stronger through their joint quest for truth. The final piece fell into place when Lucas and Nia discovered Hartford's last known location, a small town in Portugal where he had lived out his final years. Among his effects, shipped back to Chicago at their request, they found a journal detailing his perspective on the events that had shaped both families. His final entry read, "Love, in all its forms, deserves the chance to flourish. Sometimes protecting that love requires sacrifice, but truth, given time and courage, will always find its way to the light." In a ceremony that combined elements of both families' traditions, Lucas and Nia married in the garden where their grandmothers had first discovered their sisterhood. Richard, recovered enough to attend, walked Nia down the aisle alongside her father, a symbolic joining of the families that had been separated for so long. The Harrington River's legacy was forever changed, but in ways that honored rather than obscured the past. The truth had finally emerged, not as a destructive force, but as a foundation for healing and renewal. Their story became a testament to the power of love, romantic, familial, and fraternal, to overcome the barriers of society and time.